28 years ago, I started practicing meditation. As I was getting sober, and I spent many years studying and practicing what we call the Dharma, Buddhist teachings, and then there was the big question of, well, what am I gonna do with my life other than meditate? How am I going to be of service? How am I going to... I had a very strong drive to try to help create a positive change in the world, and but I didn't totally know how to do it. I didn't know what I was going to do or how to engage, or I knew I wanted to help. I knew I wanted to be of service. I worked for many years in the medical field. And then 20 years ago, I was in India with some friends, and I was doing this practice called A Year to Live that my father had created, of looking at life as impermanent and this preparation for death, of if I were going to die, if I had a 12-month left to live. And as part of that practice, I had gone back to India. I'd been there before, and I'd gone back. And there was this moment... and I'd already started to teach meditation a little bit. Actually, right around that time, I started going back into the juvenile hall that I had been incarcerated in, where I started meditating and giving mindfulness instructions to the kids that were locked up there. And I was doing kind of pre-med requisites, because I thought maybe I'd become a physician or a physician's assistant or some sort of... I was working in the medical field, and I thought, okay, this is a way that I can help. And I was standing in the Indian Ocean with my friend Vinny, and we were both in this Year to Live practice, and towards the end of it, and we said, kind of like, well, what would you do if you weren't dying? If you actually weren't dying, you know, if you live, what are you going to do with your life? And for me, I said, I think I'm just going to go back to school and become a therapist, because it's really shifted from my interest in serving the body and kind of the medical work that I had done. And I'm actually not that interested in people's bodies, but I'm very interested in the mind and in the suffering and the way that the mind causes most of our suffering. Our relationship, the mind's relationship to the body. And I'd been studying Buddhism for so long, and I had some sense that I would begin teaching Buddhism eventually, but I felt like, I need the Western perspective to balance this Eastern practice and perspective that I'd been holding for at that point. And I know that actually many people actually get into Western psychology, and that leads them to mindfulness and maybe interest in Buddhism and Dharma. And for me, it was the other way. And you know, that's probably not that uncommon either, of people who are interested in Dharma, like Stephen, you know, his story of showing up at the Zen Center and then eventually becoming a therapist and seeing, these fit pretty well. Of course, there's some bridges that we have to build between the 100-year-old tradition of psychology and the 2,600-year-old tradition of Buddha, Dharma, or awakened, the truth that we can awaken to. So like Steve, I've been reflecting on the connection, and I feel like he, you know, I liked so much of what he had to say, and the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, as a psychologist, as a physician. And I had one teacher who pointed out to me, and I thought that this was really interesting. I think it was while I was becoming a therapist. He said, you know, our Buddhist tradition is called Theravada, or Theravada. And it comes from the same Latin root as therapist, Theravada. Thera meaning elder. That's a kind of, it's the term of becoming the wise elder who listens and perhaps gives some good advice, and that's our Buddhist tradition is the path of the elders, and that for thousands and thousands of years we didn't have counselors, we didn't have psychologists. We had the village or the town or the temple or the monastery, the wise person, the wise elder that we went to when we were suffering and sought advice and direction and support. And of course that's been not completely replaced, but a lot in our culture by the therapist being the person that we go to. Or in recovery circles, maybe it's the elder, the person who, your sponsor who has more time than you, or in refuge recovery, your mentor, somebody who's done the practices longer than you have probably and has some experience to share. Mostly just as an aside, I thought that was sort of interesting, the connection between and this process of becoming an elder, even if you're still a young person. For me, and I started teaching when I was fairly young, my 20s and early 30s, and I was put in this put myself in this position, even though I'd been doing it, I've been practicing for some time, but that elder doesn't actually mean age. That it means experience. Oh, I have this experience with my own mind, of observing my mind, of an introspective practice. I have experience with changing my relationship to the suffering in my life and the causes of suffering. The craving and the aversion and the self-centeredness. And I really enjoyed the mindfulness and the intention reflection that Steve offered us. And I feel like for maybe a balancing and a partnership with that of a meditation and reflection on that intention to be compassionate that we all have, to be a clinician, to be a helper, to be of service, to work in recovery or psychology, mental health, right? It's coming, hopefully, it's coming from some place of I care and I want to help and I want to serve and I want to end suffering in my life and help other people's end suffering in their life. And maybe end is too big of an aspiration, but maybe decrease at least some freedom. Maybe not all of us have that sort of big enlightenment goal, but just a little more happiness, a little less suffering, or a lot less suffering and a little more happiness. And the phenomena of compassion fatigue, like we have these wonderful intentions and this wonderful desire to help and to serve and to, and that there's so much suffering when you're sitting with people, whether it's in the 12 steps or in refuge or clinically. Mostly you're hearing a lot of the suffering of addiction or the suffering of mental illness, and burnout is common, especially for people who don't have a practice, who don't have a meditative, a compassion, a letting go, a not taking it all so personal practice. If the self gets too involved in anything, it's kind of a setup for some suffering and some grief and disappointment. And so I was thinking about the First Noble Truth of what Buddha Dharma asks us to turn towards the suffering and to begin to meet it with compassion. And to break any denial, and there's a Tibetan practice that I've enjoyed very much over the years called Tomlin, which translates as something like giving and receiving, or taking and responding. And I feel like that's so much what clinicians are doing, right? Is you're sitting with somebody who's suffering in some way or another, and then you're trying to give a compassionate response. And my sense is that it has to be done from the inside out, right? Like tending first and foremost to our own suffering with compassion, and then that way we actually have the ability to do it for others. There's that kind of thing that we all ignore on the airplane of like, in case of a crash, please put your own mask on first before helping your children. And everybody's like, fuck that, I'm going to help my kids. Right? First put on your... but the wisdom of that, of like, actually, if we don't take care of ourselves, we're not going to be able to breathe, and we're not going to be able to help anybody else. And that's the burnout, that's the fatigue that can happen when we get so into helping others and we forget about this person right here who also needs our attention, who also needs our compassion, who also needs our forgiveness or our kindness, right? The person here in our own skin. There's a place in the Buddha's teaching, and it comes in a dialogue, but the gist of it is he's teaching loving kindness practice, and he says something like, you could search the entire planet and not find anybody more worthy of your loving kindness or compassion or attention than yourself. And, the flailing arm bodhisattva that Steve was talking about, of trying to fix everyone else, but not coming home to, this is a work that has to be done from the inside out. Tending to ourselves, putting on our mask, doing our meditation, taking our time for retreat. And not in a selfish way. I think the flip side of that teaching is there's nobody less worthy of our love, of our kindness, of our attention than ourselves either. It's not that it's not a self-centered suggestion, but it's a self-care suggestion, self-love, self-compassion suggestion for the benefit of all living beings. And Buddhism, we say that a lot, for the benefit of all living beings, and not others. You might hear sometimes a Buddhist translation of compassion saying, for the benefit of others. And sometimes there's a pretty heavy 12-step conditioning that says, be of service to others. Which is wise, has wisdom in it for sure. But there's Buddhist perspective that says actually all, and remember to include yourself in the interconnected, interdependent web of existence, which is all, including ourselves. And I think that's so much the intention of what Steve's putting together, and I'm happy to be here to participate and to help for the benefit of our clients and our students and our friends and our family and our children, and our children's children, doing our own work, doing our own developing of wisdom and compassion through the meditative, through this kind of Buddhist offering of practice. So that having been said, let's do a sitting meditation, and I'll offer some instructions. And I'll throw this into the instructions in one way or another. But I just want to quickly say, it's so important to also remember the joy. It's so easy to get bogged down in the suffering. And to forget to celebrate actually the successes when you really have a successful intervention, or a successful recovery, or a successful healing, or a moment of joy with that person that you're being of service to, and you're seeing the lights going on and they're really getting it. And the Buddha talked about this of appreciative joy or sympathetic joy. We so often think about empathy as empathy with pain. But the Buddha in his wisdom said, no, also don't forget to empathize with happiness. not just the pain. Yes, very good to empathize and have compassion for the pain. Important, super important. But also when somebody's happy, when there's a success, when there's a joy, enjoy that too, and remember to focus on how much of that is available too. Not only our own happiness, but if you can multiply that times 8 billion or trillions or whatever. If you really start to look and say, not only let's address the suffering, but let's also address the joy and enjoy it. So I'll throw some of those reflections in the meditation too.